Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we crack open the world's most influential books on finance, business, and mindset, extracting the knowledge nuggets you can use right now. Today, we're embarking on a Fatter Wallets read, focusing on a book that, well, it really fundamentally challenged the financial gospel taught in most homes and schools.
We are definitely getting into a big one today. It's Robert T. Kiyosaki and Sharon L. Lecter's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. What the rich teach their kids about money that the poor and middle class don't. And, if a single book can be credited with launching, say, a whole generation of entrepreneurs and especially real estate investors, this might be it.
It really is a seminal work, not just straightforward personal finance, but really getting into mindset, entrepreneurial thinking. And its structure is so unique, isn't it? Based on his childhood, getting advice from two totally different father figures. That gives it a narrative punch few other books in this space have.
Oh, absolutely. That contrast is the core strength. You've got his biological dad, the poor dad, who was brilliant academically, high-ranking education official, highly educated. And then you have his best friend's father, the rich dad, who I believe was a high school dropout, but became this incredibly successful business owner and investor.
Right. And the book isn't really about who was smarter in an academic sense.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's about which one had the, let's say, superior financial operating system. Which mindset led to actual wealth.
And the genius of it, I think, is how perfectly it identifies and then just dismantles that outdated path so many of us are taught. That old script,
To study hard, get good grades.
a safe, secure job with benefits, that whole thing.
Exactly. And Kiyosaki's core argument is that this advice, well, maybe it worked reasonably okay for, say, our grandparents' generation.
Yeah, the generation that actually had things like guaranteed pensions, lifelong employment stability.
Right. That world.
Yeah.
But today,
Yeah.
he argues that advice is disastrously inadequate. It just doesn't map onto the current reality.
So tell us a bit more about why it's so inadequate now, especially for maybe our listeners who are just starting out entering the professional world.
Well, the entire economic landscape has shifted, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, job security is largely an illusion for most people. Companies downsize, they outsource, they restructure constantly. And pensions, almost universally replaced by defined contribution plans, like 401ks, which means all the investment risk. That's shifted entirely onto you, the employee.
Right. No more guarantees.
Plus, you've got serious demographic questions looming over the future solvency of things like Social Security and Medicare. That traditional promise of guaranteed security from external sources, it's basically gone.
So, okay, if traditional education teaches you how to be a really good employee, how to earn money, Kiyosaki's book is positioned as the other education, the one on how to be a smart owner and investor, what to actually do with the money once you make it.
Exactly. It's a really urgent call for financial literacy, for understanding the rules of money, not just how to work for it.
Okay, let's dive into the core concepts then. And I think we have to start with really breaking down that philosophical divide you mentioned, that poor dad versus rich dad mindset is kind of the lens for everything else, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Understanding their two approaches to life and money is fundamental.
So, poor dad's logic, it was really rooted in security, right?
Percent.
And professionalism.
Very much so. He advised working for big institutions, focusing on job titles, climbing the ladder, getting those benefits. He really emphasized academic achievement. Become a doctor, lawyer, accountant, a highly skilled professional.
And his view on wealth itself, it seemed a bit critical or at least focused on fairness within the existing system.
Yeah, he believed the rich should probably pay more taxes, support the social structures. His world was about working within the system.
And crucially, there was that phrase he used constantly, the one Rich Dad pointed out as being so destructive mentally.
Yes, I can't afford it.
That specific phrase.
Kiyosaki argues, or rather, Rich Dad argued, that saying, I can't afford it, just immediately shuts down your brain. It kills creativity. You accept a limitation as a permanent reality. End of story.
Okay, contrast that with Rich Dad, the entrepreneur, the investor. Totally different operating
It's a
system.
completely different premise. His advice was essentially, own the assets, own the systems. Learn how to hire smart people to run those systems for you. Don't be the system, own the system.
And instead of I can't afford it, he insisted on asking a very different kind of question.
Right. The question was always, how can I afford it?
Which sounds simple, but the implication is huge.
It is. And it wasn't saying, go buy everything recklessly. It wasn't about mindless consumption. He saw the brain as this incredibly powerful tool. Asking how forces your brain to switch into active problem-solving mode.
Turns a dead end into a challenge.
Exactly. It turns a limiting statement into a mental workout. Rich Dad was all about managing risk intelligently, learning from pressure, training your mind to find financial solutions. Poor Dad prioritized avoiding risk, prioritizing that safety and job protection above almost everything else.
What's really fascinating is that the book doesn't just focus on the outcomes.
Mm.
Rich dad got rich, poor dad struggled financially. It emphasizes the process of thinking that led there.
Mm-hmm.
Kiyosaki says the biggest gift wasn't just getting rich dad's advice, but having these two powerful, opposing viewpoints presented to him simultaneously.
Precisely. That conflict, that friction, was invaluable.
Yeah.
If he'd only had Poor Dad, he likely would have just passively accepted the traditional path without question.
Sure.
If he'd only had Rich Dad, maybe he would have been too reckless, not grounded enough. But having both forced him to constantly think, compare, analyze the advice, and then consciously choose his own way forward.
Which is a process everyone listening really needs to undertake for themselves, right? Examining the advice they've received and deciding which path makes sense now.
Absolutely. You have to become an active participant in choosing your financial philosophy.
Okay, so that comparison naturally leads us into the first big lesson from Rich Dad. The rich don't work for money. This gets right into diagnosing the rat race.
Yeah, this is a core concept. Kiyosaki paints this really vivid, kind of depressing picture of the rat race cycle, and he argues it traps the vast majority of educated, hardworking people.
How does that cycle typically start and perpetuate itself?
It usually begins conventionally enough. You go to school, you get a job, but then financial gravity sort of takes over. You acquire debts, student loans maybe, credit cards definitely, eventually a mortgage.
The usual stuff.
Right. Then you start needing more income to cover these rising expenses and your desired lifestyle. So you seek promotions, you work harder, you chase raises, you think more money is the solution.
But the moment that income increases, what inevitably happens?
Your expenses rise right along with it, or sometimes even faster. You move to a bigger house, get a nicer car, maybe take more expensive vacations, and now that higher income pushes you into higher tax brackets too. Lifestyle inflation eats it all up.
So you're running faster and faster on the treadmill?
Just to stay in the same place financially, or maybe even fall slightly behind despite earning more on paper.
And Kiyosaki argues you become trapped. But who are you actually working for in that scenario? It's not just for yourself.
No, definitely not. He says you end up working primarily for three entities. First, the owners of the company you work for, you're making them rich. Second, the government paying ever-increasing taxes on your wages. And third, the bank servicing your mortgage and all that consumer debt.
So his summary is pretty stark.
Yeah, he basically calls it being a high-paid slave, trapped in a system that's fundamentally driven by emotion, not by rational thought or financial intelligence.
Okay, let's unpack those two key emotions he says fuel the rat race. Fear and greed. Or maybe desire.
They work together like a one-two punch. First comes fear. Primarily, it's the fear of not being able to pay your bills, the fear of being fired, the fear of ending up poor or destitute. That fear is what motivates most people to drag themselves out of bed and go to work every single day.
Okay, so fear gets you to work. Then what happens when the paycheck arrives?
As soon as the money hits the bank account, the other emotion kicks in. Desire, or what he sometimes calls greed. This is the drive to spend that money immediately on luxuries, on entertainment, on things that provide temporary pleasure, or that fleeting feeling of security a new purchase can give,
And the money flows right back out.
pretty much instantly. Which, of course, resets the fear cycle for the next month, because now the money's gone again and the bills are still coming.
So people are just reacting emotionally to the paycheck rather than pausing to think strategically.
Exactly. Reacting instead of planning. And this is captured perfectly in that story about young Kiyosaki and his friend Mike working for Rich Dad for, was it 10 cents an hour?
Yeah, tell us that story again, especially the part where Kiyosaki felt completely exploited and angry.
Right. So Rich Dad hires Kiyosaki and Mike to do basic work in one of his stores for practically nothing, 10 cents an hour. Kiyosaki starts feeling really used, underpaid, and justifiably angry. He wants to quit. He feels it's totally unfair. But Rich Dad intentionally lets him simmer in that anger for weeks. Doesn't offer a raise, doesn't change anything.
Letting the pressure build.
Exactly. Finally, Kiyosaki confronts Rich Dad, basically demanding a raise, or he's walking out.
Yeah.
And Rich Dad stops him right there. He says that feeling that anger, that frustration, that sense of injustice, that is the passion you need for real learning about money.
Interesting. Not the anger itself, but the energy behind it.
Right. Rich Dad pointed out that most employees, when they feel underpaid or unhappy, just blame their boss, blame the job, and ask for a small raise. They never step back and realize that life is actually pushing them, trying to teach them a fundamental lesson about how money really works and how not to be controlled by it.
The lesson being, don't just react to being pushed around by life or finances.
Use that pressure, that discomfort, to force yourself to think, to find a better solution, a different way out, rather than just asking for slightly more money within the same trap.
And the really profound insight here is that just having more money won't actually solve the underlying emotional problem, will it?
No, that's the key. If you get that raise, the fear doesn't disappear. It just shifts. Now you're afraid of losing the new, more expensive lifestyle you've just adopted. The fear of falling back is just as strong.
So unless you master those emotions, the fear of lack and the desire for more, you remain a slave to the cycle.
Precisely. Regardless of how big your paycheck gets, the escape route isn't just more money. It's choosing to think and plan your way out instead of just emotionally reacting month after month.
Okay, so if the rat race is the prison, driven by fear and desire, then financial literacy is presented as the key to unlock the cell door. That brings us to lesson 2.
And this is probably the most famous, most quoted, and maybe the most fundamentally important rule in the entire book. It's deceptively simple.
Which is?
Know the difference between an asset and a liability. And then the crucial part, buy assets.
Simple enough, but Kiyosaki stresses that you must understand these terms through a specific lens, right? Not traditional accounting.
Exactly. It has to be understood through the lens of cash flow. This is critical.
Okay, so let's define them using that cash flow model, nice and simply for everyone listening.
All right. An asset, according to Rich Dad's definition, is anything that puts money in your pocket. It generates income for you consistently.
Okay, puts money in. Got it.
A liability is anything that takes money out of your pocket. It generates expenses. It costs you money regularly.
Takes money out, so it's purely about the direction of the cash flow.
Purely. Is money flowing towards you or away from you because of this thing? This is where his definition really diverges sharply from, say, a traditional accountant's balance sheet. An accountant might list your house or your car as assets because they have resale value.
Right, they have perceived value.
But if they are consistently costing you money every month, mortgage, insurance, gas, repairs, property taxes, then according to Rich Dad's cash flow definition, they are behaving as liabilities.
And this leads us directly into probably the book's most controversial, most debated point, the house argument.
Oh, absolutely. This is the one that gets people really fired up. Kiyosaki argues, quite forcefully, that for the average middle-class person, their primary residence, their home, is not an asset. It's actually their biggest liability.
Even though pretty much every bank, every financial advisor, maybe even your parents told you your house is your biggest and best asset.
Exactly. He directly contradicts that common wisdom, and his reasoning comes back purely to cash flow. Why is it a liability? Because the cash flow is perpetually negative. Think about it. Mortgage payments, property taxes, homeowners insurance, maintenance, repairs, utilities. It's a constant, massive stream of money flowing out of your pocket every month.
Okay, but hold on. What about appreciation? Doesn't a house go up in value over time? Doesn't building equity count for something? This feels like it goes against decades of, like, the American dream narrative.
And that's precisely the cultural trap he's trying to expose. He's not denying that a house might appreciate in value over time, but he makes two critical points about that. First, appreciation is speculative. It's a capital gain, not guaranteed income. And it only happens if and when you sell, if the market is up.
It's potential future value, not current cash flow.
Exactly. And second, even if it does appreciate, the gain is often significantly eroded by selling costs, realtor commissions, closing costs, repairs needed to sell. It's not pure profit.
But he identifies an even bigger danger than just the expenses, right? Something often overlooked.
Yes, and this is maybe the more subtle but powerful point.
Okay.
The opportunity cost of the capital tied up in the house, especially the down payment and the equity.
Okay, explain that opportunity cost clearly. What are you losing by having that money stuck in the house?
Okay, let's say you put $50,000 down on a house. That $50,000 cash is now locked up in an asset that is actually generating ongoing expenses for you. It's not producing any income. Now, what if you had taken that same $50,000 and invested it differently? Maybe in a portfolio of solid dividend-paying stocks, or a share in an income-producing rental property, or even lent it out securely for interest. If that $50,000 could generate, say, a modest 5% to 8% annual return.
That's $2,500 to $4,000 a year.
Exactly. $2,500 to $4,000 in positive cash flow coming into your pocket, which you could then reinvest to buy more assets.
Yeah.
By choosing the liability, the house in his view, you're not only incurring expenses, but you are actively missing out on potentially decades of compounding income generation from that initial capital.
So his definition forces you to prioritize actual regular cash flow generation over hoping for potential speculative appreciation down the road.
That's the core of it, and he uses those simple cash flow diagrams to make it visually clear. The poor person's pattern is just. Job income comes in, expenses go out, end of story. No assets or liabilities to speak of. The middle class pattern is more complex, but often worse. Job income comes in. It immediately goes out to pay for expenses and liabilities, like the big house, the nice car, credit card debt, which they mistakenly think are assets. They focus on acquiring things that drain their cash.
Trapped in that cycle we discussed.
Right. Whereas the wealthy structures their finances differently. Their assets generate income, and that income is immediately reinvested back into buying more assets. It creates this positive reinforcing loop of wealth generation. The income often bypasses traditional income tax too, because it's coming from ownership, not wages.
And this focus on cash flow from assets leads directly to a much more practical definition of wealth, right? Often attributed to Buckminster Fuller.
Yes, a much more useful definition than just net worth. Wealth in this context isn't about how much your stuff is theoretically worth if you sold it all. It's about financial survivability.
How is it measured?
It's measured in time. Specifically, the number of days you could survive financially if you stopped working today. The formula is beautifully simple. Your total monthly cash flow from assets divided by your total monthly expenses.
Ah, so it's a ratio. Asset income divided by expenses.
That ratio tells you everything. And financial independence, true financial freedom, is achieved the moment that ratio hits 1 or more. The moment your passive income from your assets completely covers your monthly living expenses, you are free. You no longer need the job.
That shifts the goal entirely, doesn't it? From this vague idea of getting rich to a very clear operational goal, achieve cash flow sufficiency. Much more tangible.
Much more actionable. It gives you a clear target to aim for.
Okay, so knowing the difference between assets and liabilities is crucial, but knowing isn't enough. You have to act. Which brings us to lesson 3. Mind your own business.
Exactly. This is about taking action to build that asset column. And the key distinction here is separating your job or your profession from your business.
Explain that distinction. My job isn't my business.
Not according to Rich Dad. Your profession, whether you're a pilot, a teacher, a doctor, a salesperson, that's how you generate your initial income, your feed capital.
Yeah.
But your business,
Yeah.
that's your asset column. That's what you're building on the side.
So my profession might be, say, selling software.
But your business is accumulating dividend stocks or rental properties or royalties from a book you wrote. The difference is critical because most people spend their entire lives focusing solely on their profession, climbing the corporate ladder, getting more certifications.
Which is necessary to earn the money initially.
Absolutely necessary to live and generate capital. But they spend almost zero time or energy actively building their business, their asset column, the thing that will eventually make them wealthy and independent.
There's a great story involving Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's, that illustrates this point perfectly. It really captures that mindset shift.
Oh yeah, the university lecture story. It's classic.
Yeah.
Kroc was speaking to a class of MBA students, really smart people. And he asked them, what business am I in?
And they all said the obvious answer.
Of course. They all confidently replied, you're in the hamburger business.
And Kroc's response.
He corrected them. He said something like, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not in the hamburger business. My business is real estate.
Wow. Okay, unpack that. How is McDonald's real estate?
The system was selling hamburger franchises, yes. That generated the cash flow. But the real game, the source of the massive, sustainable, long-term wealth for Kroc and the corporation, wasn't the burgers themselves. It was acquiring the land underneath those thousands of franchise locations.
Ah, so the hamburger business funded the acquisition of the real estate assets.
Precisely. The income from the franchise fees and royalties paid for the steady accumulation of incredibly valuable commercial real estate all over the world. That was the real business. The burgers were just the mechanism to finance the asset accumulation.
That completely reframes how you think about a business model. The product or service might just be the engine driving the acquisition of the real assets.
Exactly. And the focus, therefore, should always be on acquiring real assets, things that generate income whether you show up to work that day or not. Kiyosaki gives a clear list of examples.
What kinds of things are on that list?
Things like businesses that you own but don't require your direct day-to-day involvement to run, dividend-paying stocks and bonds, income-generating real estate rental properties, notes, like lending money via mortgages or promissory notes where you collect interest, and royalties from intellectual property books, music, patents, things that work for you.
Okay, so you build this asset column. Now, lesson 4 introduces what Kiyosaki presents as kind of the secret weapon the rich use to protect and grow those assets faster, the power of the corporation.
Yeah, this is where financial intelligence starts to merge with legal intelligence. He talks a bit about the history of income tax, specifically in the U.S.,
Hmm.
how it was initially introduced around 1913 and sold to the public as a tax mainly on the wealthy, the soak the rich idea.
The Robin Hood narrative.
Right. But what happened? The rich, being generally more financially and legally savvy, didn't just sit back and pay more tax. They used their resources and influence to understand the new rules and find legal ways to minimize the impact to protect their wealth.
And the primary tool they embraced to do that was the legal structure of the corporation. It's a classic case of the rules changing and the smart players figuring out a better way to play the new game.
The corporation became that smarter way. And this is the fundamental difference in how money flows for an employee versus a corporation, which employees really need to grasp.
Okay, break down that difference for us. How does it work for an employee?
As an employee, the sequence is fixed. You earn money first. Then the government immediately takes its share through income tax withholding before you even see it. Then you try to live and maybe invest with whatever is left. You're spending and investing with post-tax dollars.
Earn tax, don't spend. Got it. Now, how does a corporation flip that?
A corporation operates in a different order. First, the corporation earns money. Then, before it pays income tax, it is legally allowed to spend money on all legitimate business expenses. Everything required to run the business: salaries, rent, supplies, travel for business purposes, insurance, professional development, maybe even car payments if the car is used for business.
All deducted before calculating the profit.
Exactly. The corporation earns LUTAC, spends on legitimate expenses, and is only taxed on the profit that remains after those expenses have been deducted. So essentially, the business expenses are paid with pre-tax dollars.
Can you give a quick, practical example of how that difference plays out?
Sure. Let's keep it simple. Say an employee earns $1,000. If their tax rate is, say, 30%, they pay $300 in tax immediately and receive $700 net. Now, if they decide to buy a $100 book related to their profession to improve their skills, they spend $100 out of that $700. They've already paid the $300 tax. That book effectively cost them $100 of post-tax money.
Okay, now the corporation.
A corporation earns $1,000. It identifies that same $100 book as a legitimate business expense for training or research. It spends the $100 first. Now, its taxable income is reduced to $900, $1,000. If the corporate tax rate is also 30%, the tax is now calculated on $900, which is $270.
So the corporation paid less tax overall.
Yes, and effectively that $100 book didn't cost the corporation anything out of pocket in the same way it cost the employee. It reduced the taxable profit. It essentially turns certain types of spending, it's structured correctly through a business, into tax deductions.
And it's crucial to emphasize this isn't about illegal tax evasion.
Not at all. This is about understanding and legally utilizing the tax code as it's written. The tax laws are different for corporations and individuals. The financially literate learn to use the corporate structure, which Kiyosaki emphasizes, can just be a legal entity, a file folder with legal documents, not necessarily a giant building as a tool.
A tool that offers both significant tax advantages and also legal protection for your personal assets from business liabilities.
Exactly. It's a shield. The rich use this legal shield to accelerate the growth of their asset column by minimizing their single biggest expense taxes legally.
Okay, moving from the mechanics and structures to the mindset required. Lesson 5 seems to be all about the inner game, overcoming cynicism, fear, and self-doubt.
Yes, this is huge for Kiyosaki. He really hammers home that financial success isn't just about numbers, it's a high-attitude game. It takes guts, tenacity, and the ability to handle setbacks without quitting.
He argues that the biggest obstacle for most people isn't the economy or lack of opportunity, but their own internal fear, right? Specifically, the fear of losing money.
That fear is absolutely paralyzing for most people. It keeps them stuck in safe but low-yield investments like savings accounts or basic bonds, virtually guaranteeing they'll never build significant wealth. They're too afraid of making a mistake.
Whereas Rich Dad's philosophy on failure was very different.
Completely different. Kiyosaki says winners aren't afraid of losing. In fact, they understand that failure is part of the process. They are inspired by failure. They treat losses as learning opportunities, like paying tuition for valuable real-world experience. Losers, on the other hand, are defeated by failure. They lose once or twice, and they just stop trying.
He contrasts playing to win versus playing not to lose.
Right. Most people play not to lose. They diversify excessively, seeking average returns, trying to avoid any possibility of loss, which basically guarantees mediocrity. The truly wealthy, he argues, play to win. That often requires focusing your investments, taking calculated, educated risks where the potential upside is significant. It requires being a bit unbalanced in your approach, not overly cautious.
That idea is captured really well in his reference to the Remember the Alamo story.
Yeah, it's a great cultural example he uses. The Battle of the Alamo was, objectively, a massive military defeat for the Texans, a terrible loss of life, and a strategic setback.
A huge failure, by any measure.
But instead of letting that loss crush their spirit, they turned it into a powerful rallying cry. Remember the Alamo became the fuel, the motivation that drove them to ultimately win their independence later.
So you have to learn to treat your financial setbacks the same way.
Exactly. Don't let a loss define you or stop you. Analyze it, learn from it, and let it fuel your determination to succeed next time. Turn your losses into your Alamo.
That tenacity, that willingness to learn from mistakes, feeds directly into the final lesson, lesson 6. Work to learn, not to earn. This feels like the final counter-argument to Poor Dad's advice about specializing for a high salary.
Really is. Poor Dad, the academic, highly valued specialization. Become the best brain surgeon, the best lawyer, the most skilled pilot, command a high salary because of your deep expertise in one area.
Which sounds like good advice on the surface.
It does. But Rich Dad pushed for the opposite, acquiring a breadth of synergistic skills. He encouraged Kiyosaki to learn a little about a lot of things, especially focusing on what he called the 4 key management skills needed for business success.
What were those for?
Management of cash flow, understanding accounting and how money moves. Management of systems, how to organize business processes efficiently. Management of people, leadership, and motivation. And, crucially, understanding the basics of law, especially related to taxes and corporations.
And beyond those management skills, he also emphasized learning softer skills like sales and marketing. Why are those just as important, or maybe even more important, than deep technical expertise?
Because purely technical skills, even if they pay well initially, often make you vulnerable. They make you dependent on a specific employer or industry. A brilliant engineer who only knows engineering might be lost if their industry collapses or their company downsizes. They need the union or the company for protection. They remain in the rat race, just maybe a higher paid version.
Whereas someone with a broader skill set,
Someone who understands accounting and systems and people and, crucially, how to sell and market, they can build the entire system themselves.
Right.
They aren't just a cog in the machine. They can be the machine builder. They have more control, more independence.
the story about the reporter in Singapore illustrates this perfectly, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. He meets this journalist, very intelligent, holds a master's degree in English literature, a great writer. But she was complaining about not making enough money.
A common complaint.
Right. Kiyosaki suggested she leverage her excellent communication skills by learning sales and marketing. Learn how to sell her writing, perhaps start her own publication or service.
And her reaction?
She was almost offended. She recoiled at the idea, viewing sales as somehow beneath her, given her academic background. She didn't want to be a salesperson.
And Kiyosaki's punchline.
He told her bluntly, something like, "You are one skill away from great wealth." He pointed out that the world is full of talented people, great writers, artists, engineers. But talent alone isn't enough. The ability to sell and systematize that talent is what ultimately creates wealth.
So the final lesson is, prioritize acquiring valuable skills, especially those related to managing money, systems, people, and sales, even if the job that teaches you those skills doesn't pay the most right now. Learn first, then earn.
Exactly. Build your skill set, build your knowledge base. The high income will follow, but it will be on your terms, generated by your business and assets, not just your time as an employee.
Okay, this book has clearly had a massive impact, shifting millions of people's mindsets about money. But like any influential work, it's not without its critics or potential pitfalls. Let's move into a balanced critique. What are the undeniable strengths that make this book so valuable? And where might the advice need some, let's say, careful handling?
Well, the foundational strength, as we've discussed, is its incredible power as a mindset shifter. It acts like a dose of cognitive dissonance, forcing you, the reader, to seriously question these deeply ingrained beliefs about money, work, and security, especially challenging the idea that your home is automatically your greatest asset or that a high-paying job equals wealth.
That shift from thinking like a consumer or employee to thinking like an investor or owner, That's huge.
It's priceless. And the simplicity of his asset versus liability definition, purely based on cash flow. That's just brilliant from an educational standpoint. It's so easy to grasp, yet so profound. It gives you an immediate practical filter for every financial decision. Is this going to put money in my pocket regularly or take it out?
Totally agree. It cuts through a lot of the usual financial jargon.
And it also powerfully drives home the absolute necessity of financial self-reliance. It's a stark warning, really, that you cannot just passively depend on your employer or the government or a pension fund to take care of your financial future anymore. It's a call, sometimes maybe a bit harsh, but a necessary one, to take active ownership of your financial destiny. Definitely necessary. However, let's talk about the limitations or challenges. While Kiyosaki talks about calculated risk, the overall tone can sometimes feel like it's oversimplifying or even glorifying risk, especially for someone just starting out with limited capital.
That's a very fair point. The constant advice to play it big, to focus your investments rather than diversify widely, that can sound incredibly intimidating, maybe even reckless to a beginner.
Right.
And while he does talk about starting small and starting early to let time mitigate risk, there's a danger that a novice reader might misinterpret boldness as just acting without enough knowledge. If you take all your limited savings and put it into one speculative venture based purely on enthusiasm from the book, well, that could lead to devastating losses early on.
So it's strong on the why, the philosophy, but maybe a bit thin on the practical how of careful risk management for beginners.
I think that's fair. It provides the motivation, but you really need other resources to learn the nitty-gritty of due diligence, market analysis, and risk mitigation techniques before jumping into major investments.
Okay, another point. The discussion around corporate tax advantages, lesson 4. While factually accurate about how deductions work for a business, doesn't that feel a bit out of reach or irrelevant for the average person who's just struggling to pay the monthly bills? Setting up a corporation seems like a big, complex step.
It definitely can create a psychological barrier. You're reading about these secrets of the rich, using corporations to deduct vacations as board meetings, and you're thinking, okay, great, but I can barely afford my rent. How does setting up an S-corp help me right now?
Right. It might feel like you need to be rich first before you can use the tools of the rich.
Which kind of defeats the purpose of the advice.
Hmm.
I think you'd be clearer in the book that you don't need a massive enterprise to start benefiting. Even a small side hustle, maybe registered simply as an LLC, can start to provide some of those advantages and, more importantly, shift your mindset towards being a business owner. It's about starting small with the structure, not waiting until you're already wealthy.
Good point. And one more area, the emotional component, particularly that technique of paying yourself first and deliberately using the pressure from unpaid bills or creditors as motivation. He literally talks about letting creditors yell.
The pressure cooker method.
I understand the philosophy behind it. Force yourself to get creative and find solutions when the pressure is on. But practically speaking, for someone who doesn't have strong financial footing or maybe struggles with anxiety around money, actively letting bills slide, potentially incurring late fees, damaging your credit score, that could be financially and mentally disastrous, couldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's extremely aggressive advice. It really presupposes that the reader has the mental fortitude and the resourcefulness to handle that level of stress constructively, rather than just collapsing under it or making rash decisions. That pressure could easily backfire for many people.
So a more practical application for most listeners might be?
A more moderate but still effective approach to pay yourself first would be automating it. Set up an automatic transfer from your checking account to your investment or savings account the day you get paid. Treat it like any other bill it must be paid. Then, you use what's left to budget for your expenses. You still prioritize saving investing, but without the high stress and potential negative consequences of actively neglecting your obligations.
So you get the discipline benefit without the potential catastrophe.
Exactly. Use the book for the powerful why and the motivation, but adapt the how, the specific methods to fit your own personality, risk tolerance, and current financial situation.
Okay, summing up the critique. Phenomenal for shifting your core mindset, a catalyst for thinking like an owner. But temper the more aggressive tactical advice with real-world prudence, particularly around risk-taking and managing debt and bills.
Well put. It's a starting point, a powerful one, but not the complete roadmap in itself.
All right, with that balanced perspective in mind, let's distill this down into 4 clear, actionable takeaways. What can listeners start applying today to move forward on their fatter wallets journey, inspired by Rich Dad, Poor Dad?
Okay, takeaway number 1 has to be purely mental, but foundational. Choose your thoughts, master your mind. This is about consciously applying that Rich Dad challenge in your daily life. When you hit a financial obstacle or when fear tempts you to just play it safe with low returns, you have to consciously stop that emotional knee-jerk reaction. Instead of letting your brain default to "I can't afford it," you force it to engage rationally by asking, "Okay, how can I afford it?" Or, "Is this safe option really the best long-term solution for building my asset column?"
It's about actively training your brain to look for solutions instead of accepting limitations, building that mental problem-solving muscle around money.
Exactly. Second takeaway, adopt the discipline to pay yourself first. This is the absolute core habit of wealth accumulation, according to Kiyosaki. Make it non-negotiable. Decide on a percentage or amount of your income that goes directly into your asset column, your investments, your business building before you pay discretionary bills, maybe even before you pay anything other than absolute necessities like rent mortgage.
And the key is the discipline itself, forcing yourself to make it work.
Right. Because if you stick to that, truly stick to it, it forces you to become more resourceful. You'll have to find ways to earn more or spend less on non-essentials, rather than the typical behavior, which is sacrificing your savings or investments the moment cash flow gets tight. Your asset column becomes sacred ground.
Okay, third takeaway, focus your efforts. Focus on cash flow generating assets. You need to rigorously re-examine every potential investment and maybe even your current possessions through that simple Kiyosaki cash flow lens.
Ask the question relentlessly. Is this thing putting money into my pocket regularly, month after month? Or is it just sitting there, maybe looking good on paper while actually costing me money or just hoping to appreciate someday?
So, keep your day job, keep controlling your expenses.
But dedicate every spare dollar of capital towards acquiring things that produce income, whether that's dividend stocks, rental properties with positive cash flow, royalties, a profitable side business. That's the target.
Because that focus directly builds towards that definition of wealth as financial survivability, getting your asset income to cover your expenses.
Precisely. You're building the system where your assets pay your bills, not just your job. That's the ultimate goal. Freedom.
And finally, takeaway number 4. Work to learn, not just to earn. Take a long-term strategic view of your career path.
Yeah, don't just chase the highest salary right now. When you have choices maybe between two job offers or deciding what skills to develop next, actively prioritize opportunities that will teach you those crucial synergistic skills we talked about,
Management of cash flow, systems, people.
and especially sales and marketing. Even if the job that offers the best learning pays a bit less initially than a purely technical specialized role, think about which job builds your overall capability to eventually run your own show.
Because acquiring that broad skill set is what ultimately gives you independence.
Exactly. It makes you less dependent on any single employer or industry. You become the architect of the system, not just a well-paid component within someone else's system. Those foundational business and financial skills give you the freedom to adapt, to pivot, eventually to work because you want to. Not just because you have to pay the bills, because your asset column is already doing that heavy lifting.
That really is the ultimate promise of the rich dad philosophy, isn't it? Not just about accumulating money, but mastering the underlying rules of the money game so you gain control over your time and your life.
That's the true wealth he's pointing towards.
Fantastic insights. This book definitely provides a powerful framework to start thinking differently about money and work. If you enjoyed this exploration of Rich Dad, Poor Dad and want more insights to help build your fatter wallets, make sure to subscribe and definitely visit fatterwallets.com. You'll find more content, tools, and book-based strategies there to help you on your financial journey.